there's always been that problem of the brain drain where people leave New Zealand for opportunities and then they return home when they're raising their children. I think that might still be the same because people kind of would want to come back and be around their family. But really, for me, I have an opposite perspective because I'm an immigrant in New Zealand. I think a fifth of New Zealanders are immigrants, and a large portion of that are students coming here for education. And I think what doesn't get talked enough about is the inverse, where will people who aren't born in New Zealand want to come to New Zealand because there are so much sacrifices that is made each time someone comes and leaves their home country to start fresh in the new country. I want to preface by saying that I'm so grateful for the opportunity to grow up in New Zealand, but what I think about before I fall asleep at night is I haven't seen my family in 2 years. I haven't lived with my family as a family since I was 6 years old. And I think maybe in my next life, I don't have to leave my family in Thailand in order to get an education in another country or to be educated enough to at least not be exploited by the current financial system. I think maybe in my next life, I won't forget how to speak my native language because that was the sacrifice that was needed in order to learn English and really integrate, adapt to this world. I think a lot of people who haven't faced that kind of sacrifice, they don't understand like the pain of not being able to speak to your mum and have a deep conversation because we just don't speak the same language. And I think these sacrifices don't get talked enough about, and this is where the lack of perspective and the privilege comes in, and why some people don't understand why some of us want Bitcoin to so badly succeed at a deeper human level as well. And so I think, if the system can be fixed and people can get proper education in their home country, stay with their family, and nurture their own culture, there might be less people who are seeking to get a better opportunity in Australia, New Zealand, Canada, US, UK, but they can just stay at home, preserve their own culture, live with their family. So I think there might be that side of the coin as well.
Welcome to One Love Bitcoin. I'm your host, Dread. As you can tell, I'm in the back here moving, so a lot of different big changes are going on for me here. But today, I'm going to be taking you to New Zealand. Today, we're going to talk to James and Tip, two investors that live in New Zealand still, live in Auckland. And we talked about so many different things. We talked about the islands of New Zealand. We talked about Bitcoin investing using first principles, which I really enjoyed. I learned so much, and talked about the native Maori that are there too, and a lot of their struggles that are similar to the struggles that we face. So it was a really great, wide-ranging conversation. I really enjoyed talking to them. I hope I get to visit there soon. And I hope you guys enjoy this talk too. As always, one love.
Must be the money that changed me. Hey, it must be the money that changed me. Hey, it must be the money that changed me. Hey, it must be the money I'm chasing that changed me. Keep chasing, stack paper up.
She told me happiness is overpriced. I told her you worth every penny, I could book a flight. Such as life living on the edge, you here today and gone tomorrow, so can I borrow it for today? You with it, babe? Pardon me for being on my own shit. Them zippers stay zipping through the ocean. Them zippers stay zip unspoken. White KK, that's an army of soldiers.
She wanna join the military, baby. I told
then they grab me for my keys.
That's right. Sheep on the road with the zippers.
Welcome to One Love Bitcoin, James and Tip from New Zealand. I'm so happy to have you on. So the people from New Zealand will be hopefully listening, so tell them all about you.
Yeah, you go first.
Yeah, kia ora. My name is Tip, and thank you so much for having us both on the show, Dread. I create short videos explaining Bitcoin concepts. And actually, I was born in Thailand. So born in Thailand and moved to New Zealand at quite a young age. And I grew up in kind of two very different places at once, which tends to give you perspective. And I guess my angle into Bitcoin is that when I was young, I kind of experienced social inequality within Thailand and also kind of social inequality between Thailand and New Zealand, kind of developing versus developed countries. And I also kind of grew up watching my dad fight corruption in politics as well, which was a struggle and has heavily influenced the trajectory of my life. And it made me want to understand kind of why corruption and inequality existed. So my background is I tried a bunch of things to kind of understand how the world works. When I was younger, I created TV shows that taught English to young adults in Asia. So, I thought education would be the solution, but really it wasn't the whole picture. And also worked for New Zealand Sovereign Wealth Fund. That's where I met James, and manage an equities portfolio. So I thought capital allocation would be the solution. Again, wasn't quite the whole picture. I also joined a tech startup and invested in technology through venture capital, thinking technology would be the solution. But each is kind of like those experiences, they felt like they were addressing kind of like the tip of the iceberg, and they were never really kind of like encompassing until I came across Bitcoin. And learning about Bitcoin kind of took all of those pieces of experience from politics to governance to education, investing, and technology, and it helped me kind of find an answer to the problem of social and wealth inequality in our society. So the more I learned about Bitcoin, the more everything started to fall into place. And I guess for the first time in history, like every one of us has access to a store of value that can't be manipulated by someone else. Like you can't say that about any other asset class, whether it's equity or currency or bond. And from my journey, I found that manipulation of money is the root cause of social inequality within countries and between countries. And that was the answer that I've kind of been searching for my entire life. So that's why I got into Bitcoin.
Do you feel like that's the whole picture? Or well, actually, James, you said that you were like the finance part of the whole journey, right? Like that's where you guys met.
Yes.
Yeah. So I'm James. I'm a Bitcoiner. I started learning about economics, finance, and investing during the global financial crisis in 2008. It was particularly interesting here in New Zealand because how could some banks going bankrupt in the US affect like all the employment opportunities here in New Zealand? So it's really something that I wanted to learn more about. And then various roles in the finance industry. That's where me and Tip met at the New Zealand Superannuation Fund. And yeah, for me, Bitcoin is just so important because having learned about how finance and money works and just how broken the system is, I do truly believe that it can help everyone. So Bitcoin does solve this. And so I think it's something we can all agree on.
Awesome. So you really feel like, I got two questions that's going to kind of merge the two introductions, which is, do you feel like Bitcoin really solves all of it? And also, do you feel like those different angles you took, education, technology, finance, do you feel like that encompasses the whole picture? Or is there more to it than that we're not seeing? And there's more work to be done than just Bitcoin solving it all, you know?
It's a good question. I think there's lots of different perspectives on Bitcoin. I think everyone has their own unique worldview when they approach Bitcoin. There's so much more we can learn from other people with their own unique perspectives. But when it comes to money, which is like the thing that runs all the economy in the world, like that is fundamentally broken in a fiat system. That's something I do truly believe. So I think that's a huge step forward for us if we can fix that. And there'll be lots of other positive benefits of fixing that.
Yeah, and from a point of view of social inequality, kind of trying to find the answers to that, my previous experiences, it didn't quite address everything. You kind of see a little bit of, is it education? Is it the inequality of learning a key language? For example, is English a barrier to actually understanding, getting educated in order for people to actually progress? But really it's not. And I think I watched your speech actually in the Oslo Freedom Forum, where you mentioned it's not enough to be hardworking nowadays. You actually have to be close to the money printer. And you explained the Cantillon effect. And I think that's what I was missing. I didn't really understand that. But my journey from, leaving Thailand, moving to New Zealand, that was exactly what I was doing, but I didn't know that that was the case. And so I felt like I had a lot of opportunity, but why was that the case? Why didn't I have that opportunity in Thailand? And so it's kind of looking back and in my experiences, I was always trying to find that why, never really understood why until now. And until kind of going down the Bitcoin rabbit hole, there's still so much I don't know, but kind of like it starts to make sense when you start putting all these pieces together, and Bitcoin really kind of gives you that perspective.
Yeah, I really agree that it's an advantage that you have, being able to go from one completely different culture and completely different top-down rule to another, and see how vastly different people think and how vastly different it makes them behave, as a society. I feel like sometimes because we see this now, we get a little bit idealistic, I guess, and we think, kind of like James is saying, this can fix the money because it's broken and we should, strive to fix it. But how idealistic are we being to think that the money can actually be fixed perfectly, right? Like, are we fooling ourselves, or do you feel like this is really it, and this is, the answer we've been looking for? We should not underplay it.
I think this is where the history of Bitcoin actually goes back before 2008. It really started in the late 70s and 80s. People have been trying to fix the money for a long time. I mean, trying to create digital currencies. And it was really in the 70s when they took the dollar off the gold standard, effectively closing the window, that it did cause a lot of problems and inequality around the world, and the rampant money printing. I think 2008 was a real shock to the world at just how the global reserve currency was so willing to just print infinite amount of money. And so I do think that I don't think it's too idealistic to say that it's fixing the money. I think the money has been broken for a while, and it's kind of a combination of many decades of research, pulling it all together to finally be the solution. But I do think it's a bit, it might take a lot longer than we think. Like, it might be that fiat money just takes on a new role, more like a government loyalty token, or like frequent flyer miles, or like equity in the country is another way I think about fiat money. Yeah. So it's not necessarily that we have to delete everything to do with fiat and replace it with Bitcoin, although that would also work pretty well.
I think also the current system, many people don't realize how absolutely convoluted it is. And there was a great tweet, I think Michael Saylor put out, saying people shouldn't have to be experts in boardroom politics and technology trends in order to just create, to build wealth for themselves. And here in New Zealand, we have, and Australia as well, there are superannuation funds where we take a percentage of our salary and we allocate it to a fund manager who invests on our behalf so that we can retire in like 50 years time. And
like a 401k type of thing.
For that, you get, yeah, and so it's kind of like a pension fund. So you have a lot of trust in these people to be able to allocate it correctly in order to grow wealth on your behalf. But what you don't know is that, they take a certain amount of fee and then they allocate it to external managers as well. So they don't always do it in-house. And I've worked with a sovereign wealth fund, worked for a superannuation fund, and also a venture capital fund. There are fees on top of fees and layers on top of layers of almost kind of like rent seeking effectively. And you're pretty much relegating your ability to build wealth to them, and hoping that they can find enough unicorns or make enough good investment decisions so that you can beat inflation and retire in 50 years time. And
pay everybody else down along the way, right? Yeah.
Exactly. And so it's like that doesn't make sense anymore. Like, why do we need that system, those layers, in order for people to just store their energy in a stable, hard money so that they can save for the future? And with Bitcoin, it's just so simple. It's just Bitcoin. There is no layers. There is no rent seeking. There is no all these convoluted layers of people and trust, and and so it's just that's how I see it. Basically, fixing that part of the financial system, and it has a ripple effect to everything. Whether you can now have a proper understanding of what opportunity cost is, you understand how much each stat is worth. And so, I'm saving not just for my children, but my children's generation, because I understand how to spend money wisely and live within my means. And Bitcoin just changes that mindset. It's not a fiat, have to quickly spend it because it's going to diminish in purchasing power. And, you know, we have to invest it and spend it straight away. That's not the case with Bitcoin. People want to hold on to that, and that fosters a different mindset.
Yeah. And it's funny because when you say it's going to diminish or it's going to decrease in spending power, a lot of people don't see it that way because they don't realize that decrease in spending power means what you're seeing you want to buy, the price is going up. And the price isn't really going up because it's not valued more. It's the money that you're trying to use to pay for it is going down. But what they see is the price going up. So usually when people, when I tell them that they're trying to spend money because the money's melting in their hand, and they're like, no, it's not. I have $100 in my hand. I'm like, well, you're not seeing it that way. You're seeing it, you know, in the inverse. And it's true, but I have a question that I wanted to ask. Oh yeah, it was around the fact that, playing devil's advocate, all of these people now are going to have, you know, this whole tower fall apart because they have no reason to go to work anymore and help people invest their money, right? These sovereign wealth funds, these 401k companies. What's going to happen to all of the human beings now that have nowhere to go? All these financial institutions that, you know, are defunct because everybody's just investing in Bitcoin. What are they going to do? Are we going to have a mass, you know, exodus of employment and people in the streets starving? Or do you feel like, you know, there will be a new industry to build from the ashes of the finance bros that, you know, have skill sets that are very useful, but Bitcoin makes them redundant in a certain way?
Yeah, I think there's definitely a lot of fat that needs to be trimmed from the financial sector. I don't think it's mass unemployment that's coming. I think kind of the business of most banks is just to broker anything, and now they're just going to start brokering Bitcoin and other digital assets. I think the people that are in the sales area that are like really pushing products that are maybe unethical or unsustainable onto people, they're going to have a hard time because they're going to lose their reputation as people become, like, Bitcoin helps people to clue on more to that when they're being scammed. And so I think a lot of really inefficient capital allocation and the people that are pushing that are going to have a hard time. But another way to think about it is the internet and email didn't actually kill the post office. So I don't necessarily think like banks are absolutely going to go to zero. I think actually there's some cool innovation happening with a way to do banking even better on Bitcoin. I think, so like Blockstream with Liquid have just announced something recently, like it's much more like transparent, like just the fact that we don't really, like, there's so many issues with banking that the government's trying to solve with all this regulation, but it could kind of be solved with code as well. But as long as the customer has the choice to always take custody of it themselves, then it's fine. They take the risk if they want to lend it to a bank, and the bank should entice them by offering some kind of return. But it's not a requirement to have to custody your wealth with someone else anymore, which is ultimately the freeing thing about Bitcoin.
I kind of see two areas where in the finance industry, especially in the investment industry, you're investing for innovation and investing for returns. And when you look at returns, returns have blown all fund managers out of the water. And so it's kind of like, if you're investing for returns to grow people's wealth, Bitcoin's a solution. In terms of investing for innovation, I think that will still exist. People will still want to invest in technology to advance the future. But what I see as a problem right now in the current investing environment is that only a certain group of people have access to raise a fund in order to invest in technologies that will shape our future. But the problem is that those people tend to look the same, think the same, are from the same culture, and that doesn't necessarily represent every single person's view. And so I don't think
like
that's
the money, like the only certain people that have enough money to invest can do that, or is it like a class of people?
So for example, looking at Silicon Valley, venture capital has been the most efficient way to deploy and return lots of make a lot more returns, and also get new ideas funded. And I think that's an incredible, great way to invest in people and kind of the next generation's technology. But when you look at the statistics of the people who run venture capital funds and the people who have access to raise these funds and invest in founders, you tend to find that they all look very similar. And there's a
Okay.
lack of diversity in that industry. And so it's concerning when those big technologies are the technologies that shape the world. Think of Facebook, think of Amazon and all these kind of technologies. They've been a blessing, but also a curse as well. But when you look at the types of investments that are being made, you have to wonder what could look differently if we had a more diverse pool of investors. And I think with Bitcoin, once people start building their own wealth and can actually start saving and have excess savings, people might start being able to be investors themselves. People who don't necessarily fit that high net worth category or have 2 million in net worth to be able to invest in VC funds. And so when people start backing the projects that they love, backing the founders that they love, and they couldn't have done that before, we start getting a future that's a lot more diverse. We have a future where there are a lot of new technologies that might not necessarily be backed by a certain group of people, but it benefits another group of people. And so I think the investing side of financial industry won't go away, but it will be more diverse. And it'll be more open to everyone around the world with their own perspective, their own view to invest in things that they want to exist in the world. We don't relegate that to a certain group of people that can afford to raise funds, that it can afford to raise from institutions and high net worths nowadays. I think the concentration, it's too concentrated today. I think Bitcoin will help diversify that in the future. And I think that's a positive for the whole financial industry and the investment industry as well.
Yeah, do you think that it'll be an easy way to coordinate that? Because once you allow everybody to become an investor, or they have the capital, the access to become an investor, they're going to want to coordinate somehow, right? And I don't think that exists yet, does it? Not unless you're like an accredited investor anyway.
Yeah, I don't think that exists today in a way that I'm thinking about. I mean, there's Kickstarter and all that stuff, but imagine like a future where you can literally, follow someone on Twitter. You've been following them for a while. They've been building in public. They've been sharing their product roadmap in public. They've been sharing their progress. You can look at their code. It's a lot more open. You're pretty much doing due diligence while building a relationship with them on a social media platform. And now you can tip them. And you can tip that particular project because you want it to exist. It's not necessarily that you need to own the equity because you don't need investments in order to grow your wealth anymore, because Bitcoin does that for you, but you are investing in a future and a product and a founder that you want to back. That's pure essence of investing in startups. And I want to distill it back down to that rather than 2 and 20, 10-year fund, convoluted, raising from high net worth only, like bar all these people who can't afford to invest in VC. All that stuff should not exist.
Wow, that's a huge shift. I love it. I love it. I just never went that far, to go back to the pure motivation for wanting to invest in something.
That's what Bitcoin does. It distills it back to first principles. It just brings it all back to, what are we doing this? Why are we doing this? What is the purpose that we're trying to solve for? And make it simple. Cut down all the rent seeking, all of that.
Yeah. Wow, that's amazing. I love that idea. And I'm going to keep that in the back of my head now in terms of any investment. But let's bring it to New Zealand for a second, because we talk about how Bitcoin fixes these kind of investment situations in general. What problems do you guys have in New Zealand now? And I hate to say it as easy as how can Bitcoin fix it, but I mean, yeah, how can Bitcoin fix it? Or the Bitcoin derivative, products, or even the way that Bitcoin can change people's behavior. How do you feel like it could fix the issues that New Zealand has today?
New Zealand's interesting. New Zealanders for a long time have understood that cash is pretty trash. And so most Kiwis immediately, when they can afford to, buy a property. Our property market is one of the most overvalued markets in the world. Wow. And in the last Vancouver? Year and a half, it's actually similar to, it's up at that level, like Canada. In the last year and a half since COVID, the median house price in Auckland has gone from 850,000 New Zealand dollars to 1.2 million New Zealand dollars. So that's about a 40% rise in about 2 years. And so what's happened is wealth inequality is getting worse in New Zealand. And one way Bitcoin does solve this is people can stop storing all their wealth in property. A lot of New Zealand's richest people own many houses and then they rent them out. And there's this weird culture in New Zealand of people kind of being trapped in the rental market, and rents go up every year. and they're never able to save up enough fiat to buy a deposit for a house because house prices are rising too fast. Their salaries aren't going up enough. And when they have a deposit, which is pretty close to affording the median house price jumps 40% in just over a year, the house deposit suddenly isn't enough. And so people, our generation, the millennials, the ones that had Bitcoin as their savings product, over that same period, Bitcoin went up about 5 or 6 times. So houses are getting cheaper for Bitcoiners. And
Right.
I think that more houses are going to come to market and be available and no longer be rental investment properties as more investors in New Zealand realize they don't need to buy their 5th or 6th home to store their wealth. They can just put that capital into Bitcoin instead.
Do you think that'll also drop the overall value of real estate, because that'll change the market, the way the market's going, right, into a seller's market as opposed to a buyer's, or vice versa?
Yeah, it would take, so right now you could say there's like a fair value for a home, and then there's a premium on top, a monetary premium that represents all the demand from people just who are using homes to store wealth. That monetary premium should erode and houses will trade closer to their fair value. Now, whether that means houses come down in fiat terms, I don't know. The central bank is always going to keep printing money. But in terms of, in the long run, housing should become more affordable and sustainable if people stop speculating so much on it and instead store their wealth in Bitcoin.
That would be amazing if the housing market reset its value to where it should be. And then people would be using houses for just living in and not to try and, escape inflation.
Yeah.
Well, it's so weird that it changed to become that, where people aren't using houses to live in. And like my generation, like people are paying really extortionate rent and they're working, 8 to 6 and they're barely beating inflation and they're not starting a family because they can't afford to. And it's like all this ripple effects that happen that originated from a decision to unpeg the dollar from the gold by some government in another continent, and it just impacted everyone and impacted generations and created this huge generational inequality. And it's mind-blowing that is the ripple effect that happened. People don't think about that. People don't talk about that. People in New Zealand don't even understand that might have, that's the kind of the cause of all this kind of ripple effect. And that's why sovereign wealth funds existed and trying to reduce that inequality between generations. It's crazy.
There's also another thing that Bitcoin does fix in New Zealand. So when we learned about El Salvador adopting Bitcoin, we heard a lot about the remittances industry, because a lot of people from El Salvador work overseas and they send their money home. Well, New Zealand is actually a hub for workers from the Pacific Islands, like Fiji, Tonga, Samoa. And a lot of that workforce come to New Zealand, they work here, and then they send their money back. The remittance fees aren't as extortionate here. They're more like 3 to 5%, but that is still a completely unnecessary fee going to line the pockets of bankers when it should be going to the families back home. So that's a very clear winning case for Bitcoin as well.
What's the percentage of migrant workers that you have there that would be sending money home? Like, is it a large percentage of the workforce?
I'm not sure the percentage, but it's quite a large. Like we have, Auckland is considered, I think, one of the largest Pacific populations, and like it's actually quite a big epicenter for the Pacific Island people.
Nice.
I'm not sure what the percentage is.
Okay.
And I think it's definitely worth mentioning kind of a deep-rooted problem in New Zealand, and that is, the first people to come to New Zealand on this land were Indigenous Polynesian people of mainland Aotearoa Māori.
Really?
And
the Maori were first? I don't know why I thought Australia came over first. It was the Maori first.
Yeah, so Māori people are actually East Polynesian people who arrived in New Zealand in the 1300s. So that's when they first discovered New Zealand. And they, there are distinct iwi, which are tribes all throughout New Zealand with distinct dialects and culture and their own sovereign land as well. And more recently, New Zealand is recognizing and integrating the importance of Māori culture and heritage. And I think that's very long overdue, but there are still wounds from colonization, as with every single First Nation people in the world. And I heard the woman next to you at the Oslo Freedom Forum who was talking about decolonization in her country, and it's very much kind of the decolonization, so cultural sacrifices that people of color and First Nation people have to make in order to kind of fit into this world, fit into this new world. And I mean, no matter what background, what religion, what belief you have, the root of it is really we're fighting the same fight, which is gaining more freedom and independence from an overseeing state, or more sovereignty for ourselves. And I think with Bitcoin, it not only allows sovereignty for tribes, but each individual's in a tribe. And so it's very much sovereignty for each individual. And so I don't think that separation money benefits just, certain groups of people. It benefits every single person, whatever their dreams and purpose might be. And so I think that is something that will change the landscape of the next generation in terms of decolonization.
All right, as usual, we have our standpipe. This time the standpipe is going to be for New Zealand. So if you go to newzealand.onelovebitcoin.com, you can get free sats. Just have a Lightning wallet, scan the code, and you'll get some sats from the standpipe, what you guys would usually call faucets back in the early days of Bitcoin. And if you are in the US or you are spending more than $100,000 on Bitcoin, you can go to Swan Private. SwanBitcoin.com/Rastafari is how you can get there, or you can just call them. Corey Clipstein is a really great guy. He'll hook you up with whatever you need, or just call their team. They have an amazing team over there. Anyway, people, back to the show.
Do you feel like the Maori right now are still headed down a path of somewhat being colonized? Maybe modern day colonization is still happening there, other than at least not being recognized for the land that they should be having? Or do you think that was getting better even before Bitcoin? I don't know what direction it's going. Do you feel it's getting worse or better?
I suppose I shouldn't speak on their behalf, but I feel like the impression I've gotten is that there has been a good change in the direction towards recognizing Maori sovereignty, because when the Treaty of Waitangi was signed in 1840, that's kind of considered the document that founded when the British asserted their sovereignty over New Zealand and it became a British colony. The translation was always different between the Maori version and the English version, and they have maintained that they never gave up their sovereignty. And I believe that is within our law getting more and more recognition, and there is absolutely land that is Maori sovereign land that belongs to them, and a lot of it, which I'm excited about, has really good geothermal energy resources. And so taking this argument one step further, they can actually now fully assert their sovereignty push the crown out and actually become energy independent. And I'm not suggesting forming their own nation state within New Zealand, but I am suggesting that there's just going to be a lot more competition now for governance and control of the island when you've got people that have a proper legal claim to sovereignty and can assert themselves and have an energy independence. It'd be really cool.
Show me who controls the money, or energy in this case, and I care not who makes the laws, right?
Yeah.
So it'd be pretty awesome if they were able to control their own energy source and mine Bitcoin on it, and to your point, without needing to go through the rigmarole of the United Nations recognizing sovereignty, whatever, they have their own land and their own resources to defend it. That would be pretty awesome. I actually have a friend, Ben. He's also, I think he's Kiwi Hodl on Twitter, and he always is like strongly defending the Maori and trying to talk to politicians in New Zealand to try and get them to talk about Bitcoin or at least recognize it. But I don't think he's been very successful yet. You guys know Ben?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's a small country.
Yeah. On that
I don't
point,
know.
I wanted to make sure I said on this video that while New Zealand's a small country in terms of population, we've got 5 million, which is similar to El Salvador's 6 million or so. The actual size of the island, the landmass, is 10 times bigger than El Salvador. So on the map, we're drawn as being this little island in the corner. On many maps, we're not even included, but actually it's quite a large landmass with a lot of natural resources.
So it's 10. You said it's 10 times bigger than El Salvador, because Jamaica has 2.7 million people now, but we're like packed in on that island, But it's still a decent size. I didn't realize you guys were so much bigger than us, and you have only 5 million people. So you have a lot of like empty plains and And I guess I don't know what to call them.
We have lots of fertile land because we're also, the reason we have so much geothermal energy is that we're on the Pacific Ring of Fire. So we've got lots of volcanic activity, lots of new fertile land. And yeah, I think a lot of people in the world, their perception of New Zealand might change in the coming decade. Also because I like to view us as being in the center of the world, in the sense that to our east or our right is America. And to our left, the west, is Asia. So everything's actually inverted over here. Our west is Asia, our east is America, and our time zone is perfect. It's right in the middle. And so it's like the perspective is totally different. It's the exact opposite to being in London.
Sorry, you broke up on the last part about London.
Oh, just saying the perspective living in New Zealand is completely different. And it's the exact opposite of if you were living in London. And I think as the world's
including weather, I'm guessing, right?
Yeah, the weather's good here, I'd say. But
Christmas is summer for us.
Yeah. As the world's attention and economy gets drawn more to Asia, between America and Asia, well, we're right in between the two. So.
And so would you guys be considered to be also a resource hub? Like, if they have ships going between the two, they would use New Zealand as a port? Or it's too far south for that?
Yeah, probably too far south for that. Maybe South America would go through New Zealand to get into Asia. But we're definitely what's called like a bread basket, because we've got so much fertile land and so much agriculture and food production. We do export a lot of food. We export a lot of dairy products like baby formula to China.
Really?
And the rest of Asia. Yeah.
Okay. So what is the GDP like for New Zealand? Is it kind of, do you guys have a lot of imports that come in to fund that, or is New Zealand pretty self-sufficient since it's a farming? I'm guessing it's a farming type of island, right?
Yeah. I think New Zealand's GDP is like 40,000 per person, and the main export is dairy and agriculture. So a lot of New Zealand land is farmland and agriculture as well. So beef, dairy. Lots of exports to Asia.
Yeah. And I guess the last 2 years with the borders being pretty much shut have kind of proven that we can be self-sufficient, because our supermarket shelves have remained stocked because we just make everything locally.
That's awesome, man. That's awesome. It sounds like if anybody's gonna have a citadel, you guys would have one first. I mean, you've filmed movies down there that look like you have citadels.
Yeah.
So if I was gonna be in New Zealand, where would be the most, and not the tourist trap type of place, but where would be like the most memorable place you'd send me to go and visit as a frequent traveler of the world?
I would say like New Zealand. So there's actually 3 islands. There's a North Island, South Island, and Chatham Islands. And
Stewart Island.
Stewart Island, sorry. That was Stewart Island, not Chatham Islands.
There's a lot of islands.
Yeah, lots of
islands.
It's kind of 3 main ones.
Yeah.
Okay. But the North and South have a little bit of a different kind of landscape as well. So it really depends on you, the person, like what kind of lifestyle you prefer. So like North Island is a lot hotter, like more humid. It's more beaches, that type of lifestyle. In the South, it's kind of mountainous, like mountains, skiing, snowing, kind of different type of landscape as well.
That's why it was such a good country to film Lord of the Rings, because you can film so many different settings. There's so much different environment here. And the bulk of the population live in the North Island, closer to the north, where it's hotter and there's beaches and there's islands and it's kind of a bit more tropical. But a lot of the tourism happens in the South Island, where there's a lot more adventure activity, a lot more outdoors, and a lot more stunning landscapes.
Okay. Is there any combination of the two where you can have, like, it's hot, but you have mountainous, hiking trails and dirt bike riding and stuff like that?
I would say that South Island during summer, you can do wakeboarding in the lakes. You've got the mountains which still have snow. There's lots of dirt bike is very popular in South Island. A lot of people own farms, so they have a lot of dirt bikes and stuff, and trail bike riding in the mountains and stuff as well. So if you're kind of like, that's your lifestyle, then I think South Island would suit you really well.
I should note that Tip is from the South Island and I'm from the North Island.
Oh, bias.
I would just put in a good word for the North Island and say that even in winter in the North Island, if you're in Auckland, for example, it's only a few hours drive to go to like the mountains around the Lake Taupo, and like there's lots of beauty in both islands.
Yeah. You got a good trade-off here.
Yeah, it's a good balance.
Yeah.
Cool. Tell me something about, I wanted to ask about the music now, because you know, if you've seen, I always ask a guest to see what type of music they like or what their favorite music is or favorite song. So what would you want me to play if we're going to play something that's like, you know, representative of New Zealand or of you?
New Zealand has a really good like New Zealand reggae scene, I would say. There's some New Zealand artists. Yeah, there's,
have my
we've
attention.
got a really yeah, like one of the local famous bands will be someone like Fat Freddy's Drop.
Oh my God, I literally just heard Fat Freddy's Drop 2 days ago when I was in Colorado. I swear to God, it's the first time I've heard it in my life. And he just, like he just kept on layering and layering and layering more music until the whole thing was just, wow. I can't believe you just mentioned that. And it's the first time I heard it was 2 days ago.
Yeah, it's a very distinct kind of Kiwi version of reggae, I would say. And the first time I went to a Fat Freddy's Drop concert, I was maybe like 17 or 16. And it was the first time I was also exposed to like, you know, cannabis in the audience. But it was a great vibe. There's lots of that happening here in New Zealand.
Okay.
Another artist we've been recently listening to is Church and AP. And they're this young rap duo. And they've got some pretty cool raps that have some really cool lyrics about money and changing the world and stuff.
I think since they're our age, they kind of grew up with like the 2000s R&B inspired. So like they're dropping like Nelly like lyric stuff in there, and you're just like, yes, like it's really awesome. Like, oh, they're just incredible. But yeah, I would recommend Church and AP to be playing, unless you have a Fat Freddy's Drop favorite.
I think it's called Change Me or Change, the one that's about money. Is really good. On that note, you're asking about visiting New Zealand. If you want to come in the summertime and do the music festivals, there's a whole bunch of them across the North Island and the South Island. Like that's a really fun thing to do as well. Like there's lots of vineyards where people set up a big stage and have a huge music festival.
Actually, the song was called Must Be.
Must Be, that's the name of the song. Yeah.
That's from Freddie, or that's from the other
Church
one?
and AP.
That's from Church and AP, and it's called Must Be.
Yeah, must be the money is the
must be the money that changed me.
Must be the money.
Yeah, that's exactly the reference.
Song. It's awesome.
Cool. So all right, so the vineyards and the festivals, you're saying that I can come down there and spend like multiple days in a vineyard just hanging out and listening to music while drinking wine?
Yep, there's lots of different camping festivals where you can set up a tent as well. They're all across the country.
Okay, now I gotta ask the hard. If I want to make this a reality, I have to fly into the country, which means I have to follow whatever laws they have going on there. So how bad is it really to get to New Zealand?
Yeah. So like my hair right now is quite long because for 12 weeks we've been in a lockdown in Auckland and we're not allowed to get a haircut unless we do it ourselves. So the restrictions right now are pretty tough. I don't think it's going to be very easy to get into New Zealand for this summer. Or they might lift them soon, which would be great. But as it currently stands, you have to go into a lottery system to get a place in what's called managed isolation, which would be like I think they've reduced it to just being 1 week now, where you'll stay in a hotel for a week when you arrive. Hopefully that lifts soon, and then it'll just be as simple as the normal tourist visa process with probably the addition of a vaccine requirement. I think that's what they're going to go for.
Can you leave the hotel while you're there, or you have to like stay in your room and they have like food brought to your cell? Yeah. I mean, your hotel room.
For that managed isolation, we call it MIQ, you have to pretty much stay in the hotel room, although they take you on like excursions to walk each day or something like that. So that
they take you for a walk in the yard.
Yeah. So a lot of Kiwis have had to go through that to just get back into the country over the last 2 years. But it seems like a lot of pressure is mounting for them to ease up and get rid of that requirement.
Yeah, I hope that happens soon. It's a tough one. Do you guys think that there is any chance that, you know, as apart from the pandemic, you know, as Bitcoin fixes things like this, people are going to want to start coming back, flocking back to New Zealand, like people who are living abroad, making it their home again? Because, you know, a lot of people leave their homes because they're going for a better life, right? A better, more opportunity to go do more for themselves or their family, make more money. But if, you know, you're able to work and save money in your own country now because of the opportunities that not only Bitcoin, but, you know, global commerce will give us, do you think people want to come back home and it'll be like a mass, not exodus, but a mass return of New Zealand, of Kiwis?
There's always been that problem of the brain drain where people leave New Zealand for opportunities and then they return home when they're raising their children. I think that might still be the same because people kind of would want to come back and be around their family. But really, for me, I have an opposite perspective because I'm an immigrant in New Zealand. I think a fifth of New Zealanders are immigrants, and a large portion of that are students coming here for education. And I think what doesn't get talked enough about is the inverse, where will people who aren't born in New Zealand want to come to New Zealand because there are so much sacrifices that is made each time someone comes and leaves their home country to start fresh in the new country. I want to preface by saying that I'm so grateful for the opportunity to grow up in New Zealand, but what I think about before I fall asleep at night is I haven't seen my family in 2 years. I haven't lived with my family as a family since I was 6 years old. And I think maybe in my next life, I don't have to leave my family in Thailand in order to get an education in another country or you know, to be educated enough to at least not be exploited by the current financial system. I think maybe in my next life, I won't forget how to speak my native language because that was the sacrifice that was needed in order to learn English and really integrate, adapt to this world. I think a lot of people who haven't faced that kind of you know, sacrifice, they don't understand like the pain of not being able to speak to your mum and have a deep conversation because we just don't speak the same language. And I think these sacrifices don't get talked enough about, and this is where the lack of perspective and the privilege comes in, and why some people don't understand why some of us want Bitcoin to so badly succeed at a deeper human level as well. And so I think, you know, if the system can be fixed and people can get proper education in their home country, stay with their family, and nurture their own culture, there might be less people who are seeking to get a better opportunity in you know, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, US, UK, but they can just stay at home, preserve their own culture, live with their family. So I think there might be that side of the coin as well.
Yeah, I'm sorry to hear that you lost that skill set, or you know, that connection in terms of language. I know I couldn't even imagine how it would feel if I wasn't able to be home and like talk patois to my friends or neighbors or even family, because you're right, there's a certain level of connection, a certain level of mind meld that happens when you speak the same dialect, even the same, you know, inside jokes with friends that you lose. So
absolutely.
Do you feel like are you going to be trying to learn the language again when you get time?
Yeah, I mean, I can speak Thai, but at a like very basic level. So when I'm trying to explain complicated issues, like for example, with Bitcoin, there are so many words like decentralization that I don't know how to speak in Thai. And so when I say it in English, my parents don't necessarily know what decentralization means as well. But it's actually it's a good activity for me to kind of break it down to the basics, only use the words that a 5-year-old would understand, because that's my capability of speaking in Thai as well. So it's kind of like always look at the positive side. But
that is a very big benefit.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. What are you guys working on now? I know that it's been a big whirlwind for you since you kind of jumped into this world and started, you know, taking TikTok by storm. And, you know, also what else are you working on, or what else are you doing? And what were you working on, I guess, as much as you're able to tell me, both of you. I know sometimes, you know, you have privacy issues. I don't want to dox you too much.
primarily advocating for Bitcoin is a huge thing that requires a lot of work. And staying on top of the latest developments in Bitcoin requires a lot of research and a lot of just keeping up with what's happening and experimenting and playing around with it. And then what that's leading into for us is that we're starting to invest money into helping some of these projects keep going.
Nice.
So yeah, and focusing on Bitcoin all day, every day, and then trying to help make it, part of our future.
And you have good concept of unspent capital versus spent capital as well.
Yeah, well, Tip was explaining earlier about how we view investing. And so it's kind of like all our unspent capital, all our wealth is stored in Bitcoin. And then when we invest it somewhere, we're spending it. That's spent capital. We're not expecting necessarily a return. It's just that's money that we've written off and we've invested and spent. And if we spend it the right way and allocate it wisely, hopefully it builds a better future, and it might come back to repay us in the future at some point. But by removing the expectation of a return, makes it so much easier and so much more fun. And you can just give money away to open source projects and just, it's a different way of investing, I guess.
It is such a radically different way of investing, and I love it. Do you have like a name for it, or I don't know what to call it, because it's not the term investing usually makes you feel like you are, putting a number on the table and expecting some kind of ROI and some IRR and some payback period. Like none of that. I mean, so what would you call it if not just traditional investing?
Yeah, I guess I use the term unspent capital to describe like our investment philosophy is unspent capital, and that all coalesces towards Bitcoin being hard money and it's unspent capital. So when we're actually spending the capital, I just say that's spent capital. That's money that's been spent. It's not money that's in the bag and secure as Bitcoin collateral on my custody. It's a risk.
And I would say the level of work that it takes to understand how to spend your capital, what to spend, which project we want to back, is just as much as if we're expecting a return, because there is an opportunity cost that we have to consider. We don't want to just spray and pray and hoping to get something good or back something that will return. We know that we can store it in Bitcoin, and Bitcoin will yield return over and above, I would say, any startup. But that doesn't necessarily mean that startups aren't worth investing in. Of course they are. We need to progress the Bitcoin ecosystem. We need to grow our infrastructure. So we are researching within the Bitcoin ecosystem, who are the best Bitcoiners to back, who can we support. Even if it's a small check size, we want to just show them the love and support that they need. And that's how we view it, as that's our job. I would say my job, I was previously in venture capital. It hasn't changed in terms of I'm still talking to founders. I'm still creating educational content to bring awareness to this particular ecosystem. I'm still trying to understand what's going on. But the main difference is that I'm not working for any particular company, but I'm working for the whole Bitcoin ecosystem and really trying to help shape that future that we want to exist in this world.
Would you consider doing any investments outside of the Bitcoin ecosystem? Like, do you feel like there's still technology that's worth your time and effort, even though there's a lot of stuff to do in the Bitcoin world? Are you still dabbling outside of it?
I think actually an interesting approach to that is to back the Bitcoiners that are doing things like that. Because if someone demonstrates that they're fundamentally a Bitcoiner and they kind of get what Bitcoin is, then the way they might approach other areas, other technologies, and the way they're going to build their business, I would say it's more likely than not to be a more sustainable business strategy than a person who's a bit too fiat mindset, trying to chase the rich gains and the big write-up and the valuation.
Yeah, so Bitcoin really is a fundamental value that we look for when we make investment decisions. So it could be a Bitcoiner in healthcare, a Bitcoiner in sustainable farming, whatever it is, it has to be that low time preference, really thinking about decades and decades of progress, as opposed to like, we're going to do this and then we're going to exit and we're going to have a big, blowout and party and all that stuff. Like, that's not what we're here for.
Fiat clown world. That's what that was.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like Silicon Valley at its heights, right? I remember when I don't even want to talk about some of those parties I went to, but let's just say there was a lot of unnecessary hype to try and make investors as comfortable as possible to let go of those funds, and that's not always the best way to invest, right? And I really hope that the way you guys are investing, because I've never heard it before, it's almost like a flagship method of investing to me will become the norm for everyone. You know, like Bitcoiners will realize that this is the way I should be doing it. I shouldn't be worrying about returns. If I'm spending my capital and it's spent capital, then it's gone. And I have my unspent capital to live and be happy off of. And then whatever I put out there in the world, let it come back to me, you know?
I even apply it, or if I want to buy a piece of technology, like I've just built a computer because I needed a computer. And so it makes you think more carefully about each part you're going to pick, and you're going to get the best value for money, like which manufacturer is producing the best value for money, which manufacturer's got the right principles and philosophy. It makes all our purchase decisions much wiser.
Yeah, I would say it's like it's an ethos that you live by. It's not just an investment philosophy. It's just kind of like, this is how we do one thing is how we do everything kind of mindset. And also I want to mention that this type of a new type of investing, whatever it is, it's fractional as well. So you don't have to have a lot of wealth in order to invest in something that you believe in. You can invest $10, $50, the same way you can earn Bitcoin or buy Bitcoin in fractional. And I think when you have fractional contributions, you have fractional perspective, you have more diverse perspective. A founder can raise from thousands of people, and instead of like having to have one person be the main person that is the main investor or whatever it is. So it's kind of like, it's not just reserved for certain people who are there in terms of their wealth, but you can do it fractionally as well.
Isn't the risk there though that you end up with a lot of a lot of people who, they're investing and they want to be able to give feedback or, help to steer the ship in a certain direction. And you, like we would say, too many cooks in the pot, I guess, or cooks in the kitchen.
Mean, it's always like, listen to your customers. You have thousands of customers, and generally it will be amazing if customers are investors, because they're the ones using the product. They're the one that deeply understand it and have vested interest in it. So it's kind of like, you can take feedback, but if you're a good founder, you'll know your trajectory and you'll take the feedback on board, whether it suits you or not.
And also some open source projects, like one that I gave like $50. Sparrow Wallet is an open source project, and if you just donate $50, they put your little Twitter icon on their page to say thank you for your contribution, and you don't have any say over the direction of Sparrow Wallet. I mean, it's a completely open source project that anyone can contribute to. But you just have that satisfaction of knowing you pitched in, and that's kind of the investing approach. Like, you're pitching in, you don't have to tell them how to steer their ship. The thing is, you're backing them and what they're doing, but also making the funds available for other people to go in and help contribute to that open source project as well.
Yeah, I kind of do a similar thing but not with actual projects, but with developers. There's a couple of core developers on GitHub that they actually have their links. You can recurringly donate to them, and I just do it, and I have no idea what they're working on half of the time, like most of the time. But the fact that you're supporting someone that is supporting the network, like you said, invest in the Bitcoiners. I really resonate with that a lot. So where do you guys see the future going? Kind of specifically for New Zealand, but globally, because this has been a very global conversation too. Where do you feel like post-hyperbitcoinization is what it's gonna look like in our daily lives, or what do you think is going to change the most dramatically, and what won't change, I guess, is the question.
Well, one of the biggest changes would be like, I feel like as more nations become Bitcoin nations, like El Salvador, that's going to be a group of nations that starts to rival, for example, the United Nations, and its influence in the world become quite massive. And I feel like the borders between those countries are going to become a lot more flexible, where the workforce can freely move between El Salvador and the next country that uses Bitcoin, because it's just so interoperable when everything runs on Bitcoin. So I think the biggest change will be, right now the world's completely locked down. Well, we're locked down and we can't move anywhere. We can't do anything. We can't leave. But Bitcoin just feels like it'll be so freeing and fluid, and the world will feel, I think, a bit smaller, which will be good. Yeah, what do you think, Tip?
I think for the individual, which I'm most excited about, it'll just give people time to not rush into getting a job, into locking yourself into a 9-to-5 job in order to just pay rent and live like a robot. I think that's the most fundamental thing as a human being, is to just have enough wealth so you can figure out what you want to do. And I think in the past, our families have had that. Our parents' generation have had that. They take OEs, overseas excursions, where they go explore the world. They go and actually gets perspective before they decide what they want to do. And I would love to have more of that, where people just spend time understanding the world before they can understand their place in the world, before I can understand what they bring to the world, what they want to do, their passions, what the world needs, what they love doing, kind of all these things. I think Bitcoin will bring that out of people. And I think like we'll just be better for it, because we'll have people loving what they do and figuring out what they want to do in life. And I think that's beautiful, compared to rushing to get a corporate job and getting promotions and kind of just not really living properly.
Yeah, more time. Hopefully that means more art, more music, more of that Renaissance style,
Absolutely, more creativity, just like actually tapping into that part of your brain. It's beautiful. And I've been doing more of that since leaving my job. Like the favorite thing for me to do is just sit in silence with my headphones on and read about Bitcoin and write poetry about Bitcoin, or writing my songs about Bitcoin. And I'm just in my most happiest place when I do that, because everything just clicks in my brain, and it's just, it's such a wonderful feeling. And I think everyone should have that feeling, whatever their passion is. It's beautiful.
I agree. It comes out in your songs too, and your videos. Like everybody probably knows you're on TikTok, and every time I watch another one, it's like, okay, you definitely took the time and really curated this thing. It wasn't like just a random, oh yeah, I want to talk about Bitcoin. It was, you could tell that it's an art form, and I didn't even realize that TikTok was that much of an art form until watching your videos. So I'm old, I guess. I don't know. I don't know TikTok or anything like that, but it's really cool to see them.
Thank
and
you.
Yeah, no problem. And I feel like that's the kind of creativity that a lot of people are going to find in themselves, maybe not to that extent, but in different ways, I hope, because a lot of people are, to your point, stuck in this wheel trying to survive. And once you stop, who knows what's going to be unleashed out there in terms of creativity.
Absolutely.
In terms of food, and this is the one thing I want to ask, because you said that it's a very big farming type community in New Zealand. How do you feel like that's going to radically change when people are able to be fluid with their commerce and not have to go through all the hoops that they have to jump through to be able to sustain their farms today?
What do you mean? So how would farming change?
Because today, I don't know if it's just the way in New Zealand, but I know that in the US and also in Jamaica, you have to pay like rent seeking, right? In between everything you want to do, from being able to buy your stock, being able to buy your products, being able to sell your livestock or your produce. Also having unfair people come in from, not unfair, but global people come in from other countries that mass import things that are much cheaper than what your farmers can afford to sell it for. All of these things right now are keeping your average farmer, if you don't have like, either a huge government assistance or subsidies with you, or if you're not in some kind of specialty product, you're struggling right now. A lot of farms have actually shut down in Jamaica because of that. So I'm wondering, because you guys are also a large agricultural community, how will it change? How will people, be able to get from underneath the foot on the neck of the agricultural community by the government, or by whatever fee, whatever organization is licensing them, and they have to pay to play?
Interesting. It's nothing really I've ever thought that much about farming. Over here, what I understand about farming is that our approach to cows, for example, has always been quite sustainable, because we have such fertile land and such regular rainfall. We don't feed them grain. They just rotate through the paddock with all the grass as it regrows. And I do understand that for the dairy industry in New Zealand, they've all teamed up and formed what's called a cooperative. It's like a monopoly over the dairy industry. So they're all on the same team. I think in New Zealand, the approach, like in New Zealand, there is a lot of centralization as a form of governance, which is quite popular here. And that does maybe mean that the farming's done really well here to compete globally. But yeah, it's interesting what you say about the more smaller, locally grown things. Something on that front would be, there is a trend towards complete self-sufficiency. And with so much land available in New Zealand, people do go out and just get what's called a lifestyle block. They have enough land to farm just to feed themselves. And that could become more popular People having their cow that they breed and then slaughter. And if it doesn't have to be animals, can be also plants.
And now I'm gonna have to look more into how New Zealand does farming, because it sounds like you guys have it figured out compared to us. Like every time I look around here, it's a disaster in the West. But it sounds like because you guys have co-ops, and it sounds like the government doesn't get in your way too much. Like they had this ridiculous thing about farmers in America having to be taxed almost $4,000 per cow, which would probably bankrupt a lot of them. But it sounds like you guys don't have any kind of issues like that at all.
I think since like farming and dairy is our main export as well, we have to treat the farmers and the dairy owners right. And so since that's the main focus of New Zealand, I think that's why it is done quite well here. But I'm not an expert in this area, so I'm not going to say much about it. I don't actually really know.
Yeah.
Oh, that's cool. Well, I've had you guys for like almost an hour. Oh God, it is an hour. So I guess the question would be to let the world and New Zealand and Jamaica know what the last thing you want to tell them about Bitcoin, where they can find you, and anything else you want to say before we go.
I'd love to, if all the Kiwis are watching and are interested in Bitcoin, please reach out. We're still in New Zealand. I'd love to connect with more Bitcoiners in New Zealand. You can find me at tip_NZ on Twitter and TikTok. And I'd just love to educate more Kiwis on Bitcoin as well. But the same goes for everyone around the world. Always feel free to reach out and say hi.
Yeah, just want to remind people that Bitcoin's quite a big movement, a cultural change. It's a lot different than just speculation on some new digital asset. And so if you're new to this space or you're just getting involved, there's lots of shiny things to look at and lots of advertising for all these alternative cryptos and everything. But try to focus in on what makes Bitcoin different. Try to keep learning. Don't give up learning about Bitcoin. There's always more to learn, and always humble yourself because you don't know everything. I thought I knew everything about money when I worked at a bank, but I didn't know anything about money. Yeah, and you can find me on Twitter at James Liggy.
James Liggy, you said? Liggy?
James Viggy for Vigiano, Viggy.
Viggy. Got it. That's pretty awesome. And just so you guys know, I've been doing this for the last several episodes, but no one really figured it out, I guess. But I'm also going to be putting up a link that will have a faucet on it specifically for New Zealand. So it'll be like newzealand.onelovebitcoin.com. And then, what I want to happen is that whenever we have these episodes, people in New Zealand that watch it, they get to get the faucet before everybody else. So I would say that, spread the word amongst your local friends, then have them watch the episode, and then they can go to the faucet, click the QR code and get some free sats. So hopefully we're spreading it around the world that way. Yeah.
No, that's epic.
Nice one.
Yeah, that's great.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thanks for the time. Yeah, that was amazing.
No worries.
Hit me up on Twitter anytime. I'll talk to you guys soon.
Yeah. Lovely to meet you.
Bye.
Nice to meet you too. Bye.